consequential moves on immigration. As you are well aware, President Trump has signed numerous executive orders dealing with immigration and illegal immigration. One of them deals with expanding the use of the U.S. military. We have fresh reporting, which we'll get to in just a few moments, about the details of that military deployment, what they will or will not be doing, plus new reporting on orders just given to the Border Patrol about those they interdict at the southern border. All that's coming up in a few minutes. In addition to that, ditching diversity. President Trump has abruptly ended initiatives that aim to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion inside the federal government.
Diversity, equity, and inclusion mandates all across the government and private sector in return our country to the merit system, you know?
Plus, something interesting occurs on the Silk Road. The president has kept a campaign pledge to pardon the gentleman you see there, Ross Ulbricht. More on the man behind Silk Road, an infamous dark web marketplace that traded in, among other things, drugs, guns, and other illegal services. Scott MacFarlane and O'Keefe and Camilo Montoya-Galvez are following all the things I just outlined. Let's start tonight with Scott on Capitol Hill and Ed at the White House. Scott, lots of things happening on Capitol Hill, including fallout continuing from the broad, sweeping January 6 pardons issued by President Trump and someone who visited the Capitol again today.
The Oath Keepers founder, Stewart Rhodes, who was released from prison about 24 hours ago, about 10 years ahead of schedule with his pardon or commutation, was at the Longworth House Office building right here on Capitol Hill, spotted at a Dunkin' Donuts, and had a long, extended gaggle with reporters who congregated around him. Stewart Rhodes was convicted of seditious conspiracy, the highest level charge of any of the January 6 defendants. Seditious conspiracy is a legal way of saying conspiring to overthrow the government. He'd been held in the Cumberland, Maryland federal prison for quite some time now, but fresh off his release, he was here. He told reporters, Major, to talk to legislators about the prisoner releases. The offers of tours have been made by some of Trump's Republican House allies to other January 6 defendants now that they're free from prison. But I can tell you right now, we speak regularly with the victims of January 6, the injured police officers, the barricaded congressional staffers. They do not like the idea of seeing the rioters, the conspirators, and the defendants here on Capitol grounds.
Ed, going to you at the White House. In a previous life, you paid very close attention at the Washington Post to the federal workforce. The Trump administration has taken executive action against diversity, equity, inclusion, and other aspects of how you work or may not in the future work within the federal workforce. Summarize for us.
Yeah, well, at this hour, there are an untold number of people across the federal workforce being placed on paid leave and having their emails shut off as the agencies and departments now under the control of President Trump reassess those programs, diversity, equity, inclusion programs that deal with race, gender, and socioeconomic status. A memo sent out late last night to agency heads made clear they had until today to do this at 5 p.m., and it essentially ends Biden-era instructions to make sure that these types of concerns about representation of gender, of race, of socioeconomic status were factored into hiring decisions and general agency practices. And so it is fulfilling a campaign pledge. It now, as I said, places an untold number of people on paid leave, either permanently in that they'll be laid off or perhaps temporarily, as then it can be shown that this was just one piece of the broader work they do and whatever it is they do. There is no one-size-fits-all policy for the federal government, because what goes on at the National Park Service is not what goes on at the Voice of America or the Commerce Department or the Interior Department. But all instructions given out when it comes to personnel says to these places, hey, start enacting these policies, or in the case of Trump now, pull it back. And so it's the first signal of how he's trying to dramatically reshape government management, which he started to do with executive orders he signed on Monday night. And it's one that's frankly going to take weeks, if not months, to fully suss out as these agencies determine who exactly was doing this kind of work, and how are we going to end those programs. Notable that at least tonight at the Department of Homeland Security, employees are being told, we know, they claim to have evidence that some of those that were doing this kind of work have gone about renaming their jobs or their programs or their titles in recent days or weeks to avoid this. And that if you have evidence of this, come forward, please, and tell us. That starts to create some really potentially ugly office dynamics. And this is the kind of stuff that lawmakers, the labor unions that represent these people, and civil rights organizations will be on the lookout for. We'd love to see the proof that they allegedly have of this. Burrowing in, as that's called, where you are someone who was put in place during the last administration and you find a way to stay behind, not necessarily to flout the work of the current president, but just frankly to have a job, is common, has happened before. This is a pretty egregious accusation to make, though, with no proof that we're aware of, at least so far.
Scott MacFarlane on Capitol Hill, Ed O'Keefe on the North Lawn of the White House. Thank you very much. I want to turn now to Camilo Montoya-Galvez to talk about the new reporting you have on deployment of the U.S. military toward the southern border, the numbers we know so far, how large those numbers could be, and what activities they are likely to undertake. Camilo?
What we know so far, Major, is that the Trump administration today directed the Department of Defense to deploy at least 1,500 active duty troops to the U.S.-Mexico border to support U.S. Customs and Border Protection in an operational capacity. That is on top of the 2,500 troops that had already been stationed there at the U.S.-Mexico border under federal orders, because, of course, states like Texas have their own National Guard soldiers there to fortify the border with razor wire and other barriers. They are supposed to be providing only logistical and operational support because of longstanding legal limits that prevent the military from being used in domestic law enforcement, including the enforcement of federal immigration laws. We also understand that, according to one memo we obtained, the administration is planning to send as many as 10,000 overall troops to the border. So the numbers could increase in the coming weeks and months. And the Department of Defense, according to this memo, Major, is also importantly considering to use Department of Defense bases and military installations to hold immigrants awaiting deportation. That would be a seismic shift in policy, because typically that has been the responsibility of the Department of Homeland Security.
And also, Camilo, you have new reporting on orders, fresh orders given to Border Patrol agents at the border.
That's right. On Monday, soon after taking office, President Trump invoked sweeping presidential powers and powers in the Constitution to essentially seal U.S. borders to migrants and asylum seekers who lack proper documents to come here, and to suspend their entry indefinitely. He accused them of orchestrating an invasion of the U.S. and of potentially posing a national security or public health threat to the country. And so, in accordance to those directives, now we have been told that Border Patrol has been issued guidance and directives to basically summarily and swiftly deport all migrants who are entering the country unlawfully back to Mexico or to their home countries, importantly, without affording them the chance and opportunity to request asylum, which traditionally has been an obligation under domestic and international refugee law.
Significant applications of immigration policy that may run up against precedential American law. Camilo Montoya-Galvez, thank you very much for your reporting.